But the previous question of, guys not getting paid when they did work and everything, and in my warped mind, it brought me to another subject, because so many people today go, well, all the old wrestling, the guys didn't make it, and it was all small time, and now the big money and blah, blah, blah. And a lot of the guys from those days perpetuated the idea they didn't make a lot of money. Some of them didn't make a lot of money. Others like to lie about it. But it hit me watching these television shows that we watched this past week, and then thinking about those days and looking at records and etc. The entire wrestling business today better be glad that they don't have to sell tickets, because nobody is. Nobody. And because a lot of people are wondering, well, why didn't they pay guys when they didn't go to the show? Because that's where the promotions made all their money, was at the house shows, and that's where the guys made all their money. That was the money. Ticket sales was the money in wrestling. Nobody was getting paid for their television program, except Memphis got $1,500 a week. There may have been an odd arrangement for a few hundred here and there. Also, nobody was paying any appreciable money for production either. The TV station loved to have the show because a lot of people watched it, and the promotion loved to have the show because it promoted all of their live events where they made all their money. So there was no budget for just paying a guy to, well, we'll keep you around for, 6 weeks and just do TV. The lowest payoffs were for the TV tapings. If you were a job guy, you actually got more than the main event stars, because the main event stars in a lot of territories didn't get paid for television at all. And in other places, like Mid-South Wrestling, they got $40, which basically covered your hotel and dinner at that point in time. And that's what the stars got for TV, because it was all geared to house shows. And I know that the fans that are used to modern wrestling think that, oh, well, look, they sold 8,000 tickets in Boston, or, wow, the big sellout and such. That's not a lot of tickets, and it's only once in a while. When you talk about the repetition and the large numbers of tickets that were sold to pro wrestling in any previous generations, up until the last 20, 25 years, it dwarfs what's going on now. And so that's why guys worked hurt, or guys bent over backwards to make the show, because that's how they got paid. And also for a lot of people who say, well, how much did you get for going to North Wilkesboro, North Carolina? Well, $125. Well, geez, they pay $200 or $300 now for the opening match guys on this or that independent. Well, besides the fact this was 30, 40 years ago, that was one night of your week. You were wrestling 7 nights a week in a lot of cases, and multiple times on some weekend days. So these figures added up. And we've talked about the big shows, St. Louis. We've talked about big money. I just saw a thing on Gene Kiniski from the Maple Leaf Gardens Twitter account that said Kiniski, he got hot in Toronto and Buffalo in the Midwest in 1957, had a huge year, and he made $89,000. And that was his best year until he became the NWA World Champion in 1966. $89,000 in 1957 is the equivalent of over $800,000 today. And Gene Kiniski wasn't the highest paid guy in wrestling then. But while we've talked about a lot of the big towns, the St. Louises and the Torontos and the Gates and the payoffs, and we've mentioned where we have Sam Muchnick's ledger sheets and see that you could make $6,000 defending the NWA World title in St. Louis 40 years ago. Nobody looks at the spot shows. So I thought it would be fun, Brian, to take a look at just any territory from 1980. Let's say just a nice round number, 40 years ago. That's right when I was getting in the business. It's right before I became a performer, but I was still a photographer. I knew what the merchandise stands were taking in. I knew how much the tickets were and how many people were buying them. So let's take a look at a spot show in 1980 from any average territory, just a small town, and let me illustrate why being a wrestling promoter in those days was often a license to print money. Okay?
Yeah, I'd like to hear this because
right.
I've seen plenty of wrestling promoters who can't figure out how to turn the printing press on.
Well, okay, in 1980, let's say you ran a spot show in Hohenwald, Tennessee, or Rabbit Ridge, Kentucky, or anywhere in Georgia, North Carolina, South Carolina, Virginia, Texas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Arkansas, Oklahoma, Missouri, Kansas, wherever there was a territory, which was everywhere, except for Vern Gagne wasn't into really running a lot of the small towns. He only ran 15, 16 days a month back in those days. And Vince McMahon Sr. had already graduated to mostly bigger buildings at that point, but almost every other territory had their main towns, and then they would run what we call spot shows. And those are shows in little towns that you go to once a year, maybe twice a year, maybe not that often. You find a local sponsor, an athletic team at the local high school, or a civic group that wants to get part of the gate in return for doing the advertising, providing the venue, and you advertise it on your TV, and that keeps the guys working 7 nights a week. So let's say it's a Wednesday or a Thursday in 1980, and your tickets, it's territory wrestling then, so let's say they're $5 on average. And let's say you draw 1,000 people. And now a lot of people are going to say, wow, how are you going to draw 1,000 people in Hohenwald, Tennessee? By the way, Hohenwald actually worked in Hohenwald. They called it Hole in Wall, and also announced in Rabbit Ridge, Kentucky one night. But I have here, when I got into business in 1983, I just flipped through my 1983 book. I was in Hopkinsville, Kentucky on Friday, September 16th. The house was $3,750. The tickets were $5 a piece in those days. That meant there was about 750 people there. 15, yeah, about. And then the next night I was in Corinth, Mississippi, and the house was $9,500, and I made $100. I made $70 on a $3,750 house, and I made $100 on a $9,500 house. And in Corinth, Mississippi, by the way, those $5 tickets in a $9,500 house means that they drew almost 2,000 people in Corinth, Mississippi, because it was the only time they ran it that year, and those people didn't get to leave and go to Memphis and see wrestling all the time. So a spot show drawing 1,000 people in a small town at a $5 average ticket happened everywhere in every territory in wrestling in those days. And that $5 ticket in today's money would be $16.65. Anyway, so you take a $5,000 spot show. You take off the 5% tax that either the athletic commission or the state would levy. Some places 6%, some place 8%, whatever. Let's say 5%, $250. Now you're left with $4,750. The sponsoring group gets 25% of the gate after taxes. So if your local high school football team said, I'm going to bring wrestling to the local high school, and we're going to use the money to buy new football uniforms, then the football team goes out and sells the tickets, and the coach puts up the posters, and they have the high school gym to hold the thing. And they also get the food and drink concessions, so they get the 2 liters and the hot dogs, and they do that whole thing. And they, on a $5,000 house, they're 25%, they'd get $1,187.50 after tax. So that after the taxes were taken out. So that means they got $1,200 plus their food and drink concessions to buy new football uniforms. So they're happy. You didn't pay any rent on a building. You didn't have any advertising costs whatsoever because the local group does it all. That's why you get a local group that knows what they're doing and they're motivated. You get a bunch of people. You got some that don't, you don't. So now you're down to $3,563. Well, you got to give the guy that hauled the ring $200 because your ring guy, whether it's Buddy Wayne or maybe he made his son Ken pull the truck or Eddie Marlin or whoever, they get $200 for the ring. Now you're down to $3,363. You probably spent close to $100 printing the posters and the flyers. And if it's good house, then you probably got it in your contract that the sponsor has to pay for those. But if it's a bad house, then you say, fuck it, we'll pay for the posters and flyers, and it's like you're giving them something. Now you're down to $3,263. Now comes paying the talent, Brian. We remember that the formula for paying the wrestlers has been explained by a number of promoters, but was only ever really adhered to by Sam Muchnick and Paul Bosch, at least in the modern era.
That's right. They were known for being fair, in Sam Muchnick's case, down to the penny being fair. And of course, Jim Crockett on the stand explained how this all works, although he's lucky no one really cracked down on his answers there.
His figures didn't add up. That's reprinted in the Midnight Express book, too, his testimony of how they pay the boys. But anyway, in the 20s and 30s, Strangler Lewis, Joe Stecker, all those, that's why the world title was the most valuable thing in sports, the World Wrestling Championship, because it could be controlled and maximized because it was a work, but that's why everybody was double-crossing each other. And that's why the promoter always wanted to control the champion, because in those days, Strangler Lewis and Jim Londos, they might have got 60 or 70% of the gate themselves, and you pay everything else, and then maybe the promoter makes money, unless it's the promoter that the champion is hooked up with, and then everybody's sharing. So that's why there was such chaos in those days. But in the modern era, it's settled down to where, theoretically, if your house is $100,000, let's use a round number, then you are supposed to pay 33% to the talent, which would be $33,000. And of that $33,000, 2/3 of it is supposed to go to the main event. In other words, 2/3 of the third goes to the main event. That's why the NWA champion and his challenger in St. Louis made thousands of dollars, because that was the main event. That was the match that drew the money, sold the tickets, and everybody else on the card is taken care of in descending order. But as the modern territories fleshed out, you couldn't do that because every major territory ended up having more than one or two or three or even four really main event guys in it. When you had a deep territory like the Carolinas, or like Mid-South Wrestling, or like Vern always kept a small crew, but they were all names, or in the WWF. And I remember Ernie Ladd, Ivan Koloff, and Superstar Billy Graham went to Vince Sr. one time and said, even when one of us is in the main event and the other ones are in preliminaries, we're your trilogy of heels and we're all main event guys, and we demand to be paid the same no matter what position we're in on the card. And he went for it because they were right. But when you got multiple big stars in a territory, the pay discrepancy between that big main event payoff and everything else on the card was tightened up, which meant that nobody was making the $5,000 and $6,000. I don't say nobody. There were points where guys made that and more, but not with regularity, to the point where when Watts was drawing gates that were twice as much as St. Louis ever thought of, his single main event payoffs weren't as big because he was paying a deeper crew down the roster. But now we will go back to our $5,000 spot show. After we paid the expenses I just mentioned, we got $3,263 left over. Now, the third of the house going to the talent was supposed to be the third of the house after taxes, but not after the sponsors' money and not after the ring and etc. But you know those wrestling promoters. They know that a guy that's working in their territory, that's working the big towns, if it's the Memphis territory, they're in Memphis and Louisville that week. If it's Mid-South, they're in Oklahoma City and Tulsa and New Orleans. If it's Georgia, they're in the Omni as well as in fucking, Hushmas, Georgia. This is just a spot show. They make their money on the big towns. So if you say, hey, you live in Nashville, you're booked in Hohenwald, Tennessee, 90 miles each way or whatever on Thursday night, you're not expecting much, but it adds up over the course of the week. So if you've got 10 guys on the card, remember we talked about sometimes the spot shows would have 6 or 8 guys and they'd have 2 singles and then a main event tag match and a referee. But let's say you've got 10 guys and 1 referee on the spot show, and you're probably, if you're a territory of any size, running another show that same night somewhere else with the same size crew. If you've got two guys in your main event that you kind of want to take care of that you're using on top in your territory, and you pay them $150, then that's the equivalent of $500 a piece today, because this is 1980, and they had a 3-hour drive to go to the spot show. If you've got four guys on the card, you then pay $100 to. That's the equivalent of $332 each today. And then you got five guys, your two opening matches and your referee, that you might pay $75 to, and that is generous. That's $250 a piece in today's money, and you've spent $1,075. Now, I'm not, some of the territories, this would have been a little generous on payoffs for a $5,000 spot show. Other territories, it had been about right, and other territories may have been the other way, but it's within the range. As I mentioned, I was the lowest paid fucking guy in the Memphis territory. And on a $3,750 house, I got $70. So the idea that people are going to get $75 on a $5,000 house ain't unusual. And the same thing, I got $100 for that show in Corinth, Mississippi. Here's what I did in Corinth. I managed Dennis Condrey, who beat the Stray Cat, who was Ken Wayne. I managed Lucifer and the Prince of Darkness, who were Duke Myers and Frank Morrell the Angel, as they lost to Terry Taylor and Bobby Eaton. Me and Jimmy Hart lost to Coco Ware in a handicap match, and I got eliminated in a battle royal. But it was only 170 miles from Memphis. Or from Nashville, rather. But anyway, so you've got guys making the equivalent of between $500 and $250 in today's money to go to a spot show at a high school gym and fucking work 3 hours from your house. And that was every night that the big towns didn't run. So after you've paid the talent about $1,075, you've still got $2,188 left over. And you probably took in $400 or $500 at the merchandise table. Because the merchandise tables in those days used to run in Louisville, for example, average was about $800 for 3,000 people. But they were there every week. Most of those people came every week, so everything wasn't new for them. But one of these towns, everything, every picture, every program, every T-shirt, whatever they had, they'd never seen it before, and they weren't going to have an opportunity to get it again. So 50-cent programs, dollar pictures, you took in an extra $500 from 1,000 people easily. So that means you got right at about $2,700, $2,688 to be precise. And if that's just a spot show, you're not even taking TV money out, because if you're paying money to be on in Evansville, Indiana, you take that out of the Evansville house show. You don't take it out of the spot show. So that $2,688 goes back in cash to the office, whoever the office might be, because somebody has the final word, Brian, in every territory. Even if it's Eddie Marlin carrying it back to Jerry Jarrett, or it's Jack Curtis carrying it back to Bill Watts, or whoever's carrying it back to whatever promoter, fucking Coach John Heath carrying it back to Eddie Graham. Whoever the final authority is. Who would your guy be?
Hildebrand?
Actually, Sandy Scott.
Oh, yeah, that makes sense.
But whoever the final authority is determines where that money goes from there, because remember, this is all in cash. Nobody used credit cards at spot shows in those days. You walked up to the fucking window or table in front of the high school gym door and gave them $5, and they gave you a fucking roll ticket, right? That was it. And for the advance tickets that the sponsoring groups had sold, let's say you had advance tickets at Joe's Food Mart and Bill's Chicken Place and Ben's Laundromat, somebody from the high school football team, one of the coaches, whoever, would go to all those places the morning of the show, and they'd get all the tickets, and they would get the cash for any of the tickets that had been sold. So when they got to the show and talked to the promotion representative that afternoon, when they opened the doors for the event, you would either have X number of tickets, X number of cash, whatever reconciled, right? But nobody was writing checks. Nobody's using credit cards. So the point is that $2,688 goes back to the office. Now, I'm not saying that anybody did this. I'm just saying it wouldn't have been hard to do, right? Let's say you take $688 of that cash that you've just been handed and put it into the FIA fund. The FIA fund stands for fuck 'em in the ass. That goes in the FIA fund, and $2,000 goes into the bank and on your company reports and et cetera, right? Would that be difficult to do?
What do you mean, would that be difficult to do?
Would it be difficult for somebody to do that if you had run a show in Hohenwald, Tennessee that generated $5,000 in cash, you'd given the high school football team $1,187, paid the commission tax, paid the ring guy, paid the talent, and with that leftover $2,688 that you've got in cash that nobody has any record of except you, it would not be difficult to deposit and report to the federal government less than that amount, would it?
I mean, not only would it not be difficult, this is just simply how it was done.
So, I'm just establishing it wouldn't be hard at all, and it's entirely reasonable when you're dealing with these amounts of money. So you figure that every promotion in the business ran at least 2 spot shows a week, many and most of them more, right? So let's say you just did that twice a week. You contributed $688 in cash to the FIA fund twice a week. That's $1,376 a week. If you do that 52 weeks a year because you run those spot shows week in and week out, month in and month out, year in and year out, 52 times a year of that is $71,552 in the FIA fund. And do you know what that equals in 2021? $238,196 that you could skim off spot shows in small towns and nobody would ever notice it was gone.
Hey, can I ask you a quick question? When you talked about Nick Goulas building his office with cash, how much was it?
Well, it was over $100,000, but I have testimony from 3 different people that said that in the last 2 years he was in business, when he had lost the biggest part of his territory and his towns that he was running at that point weren't doing the best they'd ever done, he still had nearly $200,000 in cash in his office safe. And that was in 1980. So the point is, $688 in cash off of a spot show in those days, going back to the office of a well-established promotion that had big towns running. And in the big towns, even then, a lot of it was cash, but the arenas would give you a settlement check. So you couldn't play ha-ha with the regular arenas like you could with the spot shows. But there were plenty of spot shows to go around. $688 twice a week equaled $71,000, which is the equivalent of almost $250,000 a year today in skim off of a spot show. And as I've just broken down, it was entirely doable. And I will also tell you this. I've mentioned Bogalusa, Louisiana, many times and popped the people who lived there. This was a fact. I was there. I have the documents. Bill Watts, Mid-South Wrestling, ran the high school football field in Bogalusa, Louisiana in 1984 and did a $34,000 house. 4,000 plus people. Wrestling had, if they'd ever been in Bogalusa, it hadn't been in years. They had a great sponsoring group. It was at the high school football field. It was a beautiful night. All cash. So, in 2021, $34,000 equals $89,764.58. Do you mean to tell me that today, right now, November 2nd, 2021, that you could run an event in Bogalusa, Louisiana, sell 4,000 tickets and generate $90,000 in cash, and it wouldn't get some attention today? And that same night that we were there doing that, there were at least 20 other major live pro wrestling events in the United States that night alone, and 150 of them that week. Hello, Newman. So,
how valuable is a local sponsor to a promoter, even if they were a big promoter like a Jim Crockett Jr.? When you had a local sponsor that you've been with for years, how valuable was that guy or that whoever that may be?
Okay, there's two different kinds of sponsors. And this is something else people don't understand. A financial sponsor like Mattress Mac, Jim McIngvale, right. Gallery Furniture in Houston. He paid an unknown amount. I'm not privy to that. But he paid Paul Bosch either per week or per month for banners in the arena, his banner on the interview set, on the Channel 39 TV show, and commercials and interaction. And that was huge because Paul Bosch was already running a profitable wrestling promotion. What he did for Gallery Furniture or any of those other sponsors where you see the banners, you see commercials on the show, you see the guy being interviewed, none of that cost the promoter any money whatsoever. It's, as the old saying goes, you're selling them the sleeves off your vest. So Paul Bosch was already making money because he was running a profitable wrestling promotion. Anything that Gallery Furniture paid him to be on the television show, to have banners in the arena that he was already renting, to be on the TV show he was already producing and airing, was gravy, 100% profit. But the sponsors for spot shows, as I just talked about, like the high school football team or whatever, they were called sponsors in those towns because that was your in to get in that town. If you walked up, and I've found this out, of course, in modern wrestling, there's a lot of schools and armories and things that have been so burnt over the last 20 years by modern wrestling and deathmatch promotions and outlaw bullshit. You can't just walk up and say, hey, you've got a beautiful 2,500 seat high school gym there in southern Indiana where basketball is king, and you know, these arenas are as nice as some fucking, you know, New York buildings. You can't just go in there and say, I want to rent it and have a wrestling show. Well, we don't care. But if the local group that either the high school basketball team needs new uniforms, or the football team needs something, or the local fire department needs new equipment, or they're raising money for some local children's charity, they'll give them the fucking high school gym, and they will give them the use of the facilities because they're raising money for a local group or a local person. So you find a sponsor group like that and say, I'll give you 25% of the house after the commission tax, 5%, whatever. I'll give you 5% or 25% of the house, and you can have all the food and drink concessions. I get 75% plus the wrestling merchandise. I'll plug it on TV. I'll bring the card. I'll bring the ring, and we'll set it up and have it. You do the promotion. You do the publicity. Get us in the local newspaper. Get us on the local radio. Get your kids on the football team out pushing these tickets door to door like Girl Scout cookies. And the building is being furnished to you by the high school because you're involved. That way, there's almost no upfront money by anybody, and you go on the fucking house. That was how spot shows were run in every territory for years and years and years. And that's also how, once you got your territory going and you had your weekly towns or your bi-weekly towns or your regular towns or whatever, if they were going and doing well, and you had a full roster of talent that you could keep busy 6 and 7 nights a week, you could go into these towns and make that kind of money. You couldn't bring guys in from all over the country, fly them in, rent a building in this small town, sell tickets on your own and make any money. But under that arrangement, the guys already live in the area. They're working the territory. It's all, you know, it's all on the come rather than renting a building or putting up big publicity, etc. And everybody made a fucking fortune. Wrestlers sometimes didn't make a fortune, but as I said, if you were a promoter figured into the office, or a top wrestling star that was figured into that territory, I'm sure in some cases, even though it didn't show it on paper, Dusty Rhodes in Florida, Lawler in Tennessee, the guys that are figured in, they probably made as much as most of the rest of the guys on the card to show up in some of those places, even if it didn't show it on paper. Lawler may have got $80 for Tupelo like everybody else, but then he also it came to him in the end somehow.
Does the promoter look for any opportunity they can to grab a piece of the concessions?
In those small towns, no, unless you're a fucking idiot. Don't fuck with it, because then, besides the fact that you're taking away some of the incentive that the local group has to sponsor the thing, then you've got to send somebody out there to oversee the fucking food concession sales. If you don't want a piece of a sponsor's food concessions, you either want to do it all yourself or leave it all to them, because then it's a mess. And then if you want a piece of their food and drink, they might want a piece of your T-shirts and programs. But I'm just telling you, hundreds of thousands and millions of dollars were generated for wrestling promoters this way. And for the guys who say they were what is the minimum wage right now? Is it $7.25 an hour?
Well, I have to double check.
But we're close. Say it's 7 something, because they won't raise it. I think it's $7.25. I was
$7.25, yes.
Okay, thank you very much. I was the lowest paid guy in the Memphis territory in 1983. There was nobody that was on the card that was making any at one point at one point when Dundee was booking, I was doing halfway decent. But the last half of 1983, there was nobody on the card making less money than me. And I was averaging $300 a week. And that was 40 years ago.
How much was the photo guy making who took your place?
Well, he didn't make as much as I did at it, because he didn't hustle it, he didn't work it, and business was starting to head downhill. And he didn't have as many magazine connections. And like I said, he wasn't me. But but I was making more doing the pictures than I was when but the point is, $300 a week was the lowest paid spot on the roster for a guy in the Tennessee territory that was, except if you were, as I said, figured in, Lawler, ownership, Dundee, major guy, had a deal like Austin Idol, Jimmy Valiant, whatever. If you're just a regular guy, it was one of the lower paying territories. And that is the same thing as somebody who works minimum wage right now, 40 years later, would make to work 40 hours a week. So the wrestlers got somewhat, their impressions got skewed. Yes, you still struggled at $300 a week, because you were doing 6 fucking towns all over the goddamn area, every week, and paying for your gas and paying for a hotel one night a week, and etc. But still, on my birthday, like I said, September 17th, 1983, I'm in Corinth, Mississippi. I got paid $100. That's the equivalent of $275 today. And I was a rookie in a brand new business that I was in. So I wasn't complaining. It worked out in the end. But anyway, as you can see, again, these are facts and figures. And for people who think that wrestling was just a penny ante, low budget thing, it wasn't, especially if you owned the fucking territory, especially if you were the promoter, the boss, or the booker, which is why I always aspired to those things. But the wrestling business itself was generating an incredible amount of money off ticket sales and the numbers of people coming to the matches all over the country. And that's why I said, they better be glad. Every company, every single wrestling promotion in the country today better be glad that they're not subsisting on selling tickets. They're getting paid to do TV shows, whether people are interested in them or not. Let me just say this, which is kind of like when WCW put out those contracts and people started making the same money, whether they gave a shit or not. performed or not, did what they were told or not, or goddamn drew or not. There's no incentive. Go ahead.
As far as booking, how hard is that? Because I would think it's a lot easier, not that it's easy to book, but if you were a good booker, it's a lot easier to book a week-to-week territory, or even something where you go every 2 weeks, as opposed to something where, in a lot of cases, the gates don't matter, the houses don't matter. It's all about delivering the television rating.
Yeah, and also it was easier to book week to week because you had a clear roadmap of you're going to be in that town every week or every 2 weeks or once a month or whatever. And you can time your TVs accordingly to shoot an angle and then remind people of it and then heat it up the week before the house show, et cetera, et cetera. But you also had a steady stream of income. That's why it took territory so long to go out of business when they ended up doing that at one point or another, because there was such a steady stream of income that you could get ahead of your skis, but you could stay there for a while before it got to nut cutting time.
Hey, let me ask you another question. Other than Salvador Luderoth and, Vince McMahon technically in Cape Cod, a few other examples, how come more wrestlers didn't look into buying buildings? I'm not saying you could own every building in a territory, but specific buildings where you know that even if you're not running a wrestling show, you can get other things in there all the time.
Well, it's been done on a small-time basis. I mean, you could say that actually the Olympic Auditorium in Los Angeles was kind of one of those deals because the Eatons had an exclusive lease on it, and that's why they made a fortune for so long. And, I've told a story about there was a guy named Ernie Couch in Manchester, Kentucky, and when the Poffos were running ICW, he would go to the matches around in Combs or Hazard or where all those Eastern Kentucky towns and come to Manchester. Well, there's no building. We don't have a place to have the matches. So he put up one of those pole barns in his backyard that seated like 400 people or whatever. They advertised it as come to ICW Wrestling in Manchester at Ernie Couch's place. And then later on, he got pinball machines and a couple of fucking video games, and they made it Ernie Couch's Entertainment Center.
Sounds like a fun guy.
Yeah, and honestly, Danny Davis, Ohio Valley Wrestling, the Davis Arena, that was the idea there. And even though we didn't own the actual building, we had a long-term lease on it. And honestly, there was a plan at one point I don't even think I've said this before. I don't even know if the OVW guys knew about this, but there was a plan at one point that Danny was talking to a guy that owned a lot of real estate in town and had a piece of real estate when wrestling was still somewhat hot and interesting in the early 2000s, that he was thinking about building an arena on a small arena, because there in Louisville, there's no small arenas anymore. The Louisville Gardens, 6,500 seats, but that's closed. There's a cattle barn called Broadbent Arena out at the fairgrounds. It's bigger than that, but it smells like cow shit all the time, and it's very old. And all the new arenas are just so much bigger. There was thought of, what about a 2,000-seat arena in Louisville that we could have concerts? It could be customized for concerts, maybe MMA, pro wrestling on a regular basis. That's when we had a Wick's Pizza sponsorship, a Wick's Pizza location next to it or in the lobby. That's something that, unfortunately, we didn't get a chance to get off the ground before, I got sideways with the WWF and quit giving a shit, and then wrestling cooled off, and that would have been the main revenue driver. But I think it'd be a good idea for somebody that could get the location and the promise from other people in the community of other events, whether it be concerts or fights of some other genre or whatever, and keep people in a building. Something like that would in a lot of major markets would flourish. But you can't find promoters that also know how to run buildings, and you can't find people that know how to run buildings that also know how to promote wrestling.
Well, one good thing is that if any of these promoters from carrying all this money got a bad back, or perhaps their feet hurt, What I've just recently learned is there's a wonderful source to heal all their pains.
You say just recently because we haven't even had a chance to try this stuff out. It's so new. But, folks, we have gotten a package in the mail. Brian and I both did last night, and we're recording early today. So we are anxiously awaiting the opportunity to pop these boxes open and play with our new toys. But a new sponsor of the program and somebody you're going to be hearing a lot about, and you're going to love them, the folks at Homedics. Because Brian and I both got two of their fine products, as I said just this past evening, a back massaging cushion and a power foot massager. And I don't know where Homedics has been all my life, because holy shit, we've just been talking about our rotten backs, and much less when I was at the Comic Cons and the Fan Fest, C2E2, whatever the case may be, standing up at a booth all day on my feet. This would have been perfect. This foot massager, you plug it in, you stick your feet in there, it goes crazy. I mean, I can't wait to see whether it's got the optional toe-sucking feature, but nevertheless...
It does not.
It does not. Well, shucks. Well, if you've got a significant other that has a toe-sucking feature, you may maybe fill that in.
What?
However, the back massage cushion... It's a back massager, and whether you're lying down or sitting up, whether whatever your comfort level is, it massages, it has vibration, loosens the muscles in your legs and back and everything, so they can cover you up here from head to toe, the folks at Homedics. And by the way, that's Homedics, even though it's spelled Homedics. When I first heard Homedics, I thought, these are doctors for prostitutes or people of ill moral repute?
No. I was thinking, who did Ken Raimi manage during the pandemic? The Homedics.
Oh, for heaven's sake. Jim Starr and Billy Garrett would be upset at you for that.
But I'm impressed that you know the names.
Thank you very much. But anyway, as I said, Brian and I have talked about our bad backs. Remember, I've been over to stick a flag in the yard back in August, and I couldn't hardly walk for 2 weeks. I've sprung my sciatic nerve or whatever. If I'd only had this then, that's where have you been all my life, Homedics? And as a matter of fact, they're going to have a special offer now that they're sponsors. If you go to homedics.com, that's HOMEDICS, homedics.com/JCE. Use the promo code JCE. You're going to get a free portable phone sanitizer when you buy $100 or more in massage products. And that's a $60 value. Here's the problem, Brian. Is that a sanitizer that sanitizes your portable phones, or is it a phone sanitizer that is portable? It says free portable phone sanitizer. Which part's portable? See, these are the questions we keep asking.
Why don't they call it a phonetizer?
I have no idea. But folks, Homedics is not some fly-by-night operation. They were founded in 1987 by a Detroit family who founded Homedics. It was the Ho family. Beulah and Frank Ho. They founded Homedics to make people's lives better, and today they're the established leader in wellness and home health innovations. They're backed by traditional wisdom that comes from Beulah Ho and modern technology. That's where Frank comes in. They've got an A+ rating at the Better Business Bureau, which means you better do business with them, or somebody will come knocking on your door and potentially steal your pets. Join the millions of customers who trust the Homedics family to take care of their family as well as returning their pets. But anyway, again, go to homedics.com/JCE. Use the promo code JCE. You're going to get a free portable phone sanitizer with $100 or more in massage products, which is a $60 value. And boy, howdy, I can't wait when we finish this show, I get to go lay down on this thing and stick my feet in it. And I'll be a pleasant kind of vibrating, not the rotten kind when I get mad and I vibrate, a pleasant kind of vibrating.
That's right, positive vibes. And I'm excited, like you said, the one thing for your back, you could lay down, you could sit up. So I like being able to have options.
Yeah, and I'll tell you what, I hate going to chiropractors because oftentimes they rub me the wrong way. But in this case, with the folks at Home Medics, now we can do all this at home. The feet, the back, the legs. I wonder what happens if you lay on this back massager face down.
Let's not find out.